Good evening, students. With our new chapter, new module, which is nothing but the structuring and modularizing the network. Right. So it is a little bit vast topic that we are going to see in coming days, right? So before that, we will see what we have covered in our last session, right? In chapter number 1 last session, right? So we have discussed there a top-down approach, right? So how you are going to design any kind of the network by using this top-down approach, and then we are also seeing how we are going to compare this top-down approach with the bottom-up approach, right? And then we also discuss about the how this particular network design we are going to able to select with the help of this decision tables, right? Because if you have any alternative things in order to design your network, right, then how you are going to select that particular alternative things, right? So with the help of this decision tables you can do that thing, right? So that also we are discussed in our last lecture. And then we move towards these network designing tools, right? And after there are some tools which will be using for the designing a network. And then we also discuss the documentation, how this particular design of the documentation can be prepared. And lastly we have discussed about the how this particular implementation of that particular networking design can be processed, right? So all these things we have done in our last session for the chapter number 1. So now we are going to start with chapter number 2. So if you see here in this particular chapter number 2, the first point, that is hierarchical network model, it is very important to designing any kind of the network, right? Why? Because if you designing any kind of the network, right, so it must be having some steps, it must be undergo some standards, right? And for that there is some networking model is evolved, right, and which consists of 3 layers. The first one is your access layer, then the distribution layer, and the third one is your core layer, right? So we will see what is the functionality of each and every these particular layers, and what are the different examples of these 3 hierarchical layers also, right? With the help of some network topology, we will understood some sample network model also. In that, these 3 networking layers can be used, right? And lastly we will see how this hierarchical network model can be used in the wide area network as well, right? That is your WAN. Okay, so we will discuss all these things in today's lecture. Okay, so just start we are just going to start with the lecture. The first point, that is we are going to study that hierarchical network model, what it is, and what are the different layers in this particular model, and what is the functionality of each of this particular layer, right? Actually this hierarchical network model, now it is nothing but the framework, right, which can be help to the designer to design any kind of the network with a very easy way, and it is very easy to implement as well. And if you have certain problem, if you have any kind of the error, kind of the problems in with respect to your network, then it will be very easy to troubleshoot this kind of the network by if you have this particular hierarchical networking concept in your existing network, right? So these are the 3 layers, okay, the core layer, distribution layer, and the access layer, right? So when the access layer is responsible for only your to give them access to the local and remote work group, right? So it will be end users access, if you consider, right? And then the second one is your the distribution layer, right, which will be responsible for your only policy based connectivity. That means if you wanted to add some policy into your existing network, right, you wanted to configure any kind of the router or switches at distribution level, right, then you can do that in this particular layer, right. And the third one is your the core layer, right. It is nothing but the backbone of your network, and it will provide you the high speed switching, high speed transport, right, to the connectivity, and it will be always connected with the distribution layer, right. And the distribution layer is nothing but the middle layer, which will be connected to your the access layer as well as your core layers, right. So and the access layer is the last one, which will be connected to your the distribution layer, right. So there are a different functionalities of each of the layers, right. So we will see functionality, but before that I will show you one the sample network design by using the hierarchical model we have designed, right. So if you see here in this particular diagram, right, so this is your core layer, switches is there, right. These are nothing but the servers, okay. These are the distribution layers, switches are there, right. And these are the access layer, router, switches and all that things, right. Workstations are there. So here if you see, we will compare it with respect to our college network, right, because it will be very easy to understand then to you, right. So if you consider in a 318, right, the 318 is nothing but the centralized server room, right. If you consider this is your centralized server room, right, where all the servers and the core layer switches are there, routers are there, right, the firewalls are there, right. So this is nothing but your the core layer, switches and the servers. 318 is nothing but for your example the core layer, right. So if you consider the 318 centralized server room is not less than any big organizational network, right, because all the servers, all the firewalls and all the networking components which are there, that is matches with any medium scale organizational network area, right. And all these things are we are managing at our own campus itself, right. So that is a very big thing. There is no any third party or any kind of thing who is managing all these things, right. So we are the people who are managing in-house maintenance is there for all this infrastructure in our college itself, right. So this is your 318 core layer, right. If you consider this distribution layer switches, then I will tell you the in 312 lab, right. 312 is comms lab, right, in distributed computing lab. So there in a right hand side corner, right, there are one switch box is there, right. So this is that are nothing but your the distribution layer switch, right. Why? Because from the 318 the cable is goes to the 312, right, in the distribution layer, right. And from the distribution layer the cabling is goes to each and every lab, right. Each and every lab switch, right. Then you consider the access layer, right. Whenever you go in any kind of any lab in our college, right, if you see in the top of the middle of the side, there is one network switch box is there, right. The switches is there, right. So from this distribution layer, from this 312, the one connection is goes to that particular lab, that is nothing but your for example if you consider 301, right. So from 312 the one connection is goes to your 301, one connection goes to your 302, 303, 309 likewise. So all the labs cables goes from your 312. So 312 is nothing but your distribution layer switch, right. And for the distribution layer switch, one connection is goes from your the core layer, that is from the 318, right. So because 318 is having a various kind of the servers and infrastructure is there, right. So whatever the core layer which will directly gives you a high speed transport layer, right. High speed transport layer devices we are using in this particular core layer, right. So because it will be high speed transport, it will goes to your distribution layer, right. The distribution layer we have configured some policy, right, based on the connectivity and all that thing. Because for example if I want to give a better bandwidth to lab number 301, because the utilization of the 301 lab is more as compared to other labs, right? So I can do that by using this distribution layer switch. I can configure this particular switch in that way, right? I can configure this particular thing. I can configure the policies. I can configure the ACS and all that things in this particular distribution layer switches. So accordingly, that configuration will be take place in that particular lab, right? So and from the access layer, it will be just useful for to connect to local and remote world group or the user. We can call it as the end user, right? For example, in 301 you are going to access all the PCs, right? And that particular network from that PCs comes from that particular labs switch, right? So that particular lab switch is nothing but your access layer switches, right? So I hope you understood the concepts of this particular three layers, right? The core layer, that is nothing but the 318. You just imagine in our college network, right? In the core layer is nothing but the 318, for example. Distribution layer is nothing but for 312 example, and access layer is which access layer is nothing but your all the labs, that is 301, 302, 303 likewise, right? So in that way we will use this particular hierarchical network model as well, right? So we have a live example in our college, so it will be very easy to understand this particular concept, right? So this is your one sample hierarchical model, right? Then we will see what are the different functionalities of each and every layer, right? We will come from the end user point of view, the access layer, right? So what access layer do, right? So it is nothing but the concentration point, right, at which the client can be access the network, right? Obviously as for example 301, right? In 301 the client accessing the network, you are going to access the network, right, with the help of that particular access layer switches, right? So this is nothing but the one of the functionality of that particular access layer, right? Then it will be useful for device control traffic by localizing the service request to the access media. Obviously how it will be manage the access, right? So it will be control the traffic by service request and to the access media, right? So when whatever the service you are going to demand, right, it will be goes into the distribution layer, then the core layer, and then ISP and all that things, right? So it will be goes into the access media, right? And then you will go you will get the response from the network, right? Then the purpose of the access layer is to grant the user access to the networking resources, right? So whatever your demand from the customers, right, that will be fulfilled by following the same culture, that is from access to distribution to core, and from the core to ISPs, right? So this will be happen in from the access layer, right? Then access can be provided to end users as a part of either right L2 switching environment or a multi-layer switching environment, right? So whatever the switching environment is, right, the access can be given to the end user is mainly the purpose of this particular access layer, right? So there are two types of the switchings is there, right? The multi-layer switching is there, the layer 2 switching is there, right? So in a layer 2 obviously it will be useful for access the workstation and servers, right, by using some media, that is for example you are using LANs, right, you are using virtual LANs, right? So all these things which will be used in this particular thing, right, and by using that you are going to get the access, right? So there are some features also, for example you can use in access layer how the connection speed you want, right? So what is the uplink, is fast ethernet, or what is the port of that particular thing, is switch port is fast or not, right? All these things also you can be managed in the layer 2 switching, or in a multi layer switching, right? So if you see I will show you one example of this particular access layer example. So if you see here in a distribution and the access layer I am showing in this particular diagram, right, and here the connection will be connected with your core layers, right? So so here these are nothing but the distribution layer switches, right, and these are the thing but your access layer switches, right? But there is a multiple we can call as connection in between all these switches, right? For example, if you consider is the first switch, right? The first switch of the access layer will be connected to two different switches of the distribution layer, right? Likewise, the same concept which applies to all the networking switches here, right? Now why this particular two links are there for each and every switches, obviously to maintain the redundancies and to avoid the fault tolerance. We need to do these things, right? We have already seen this particular concept in our first 2 to 3 lectures, right? That is the concept called it as reliable network, right? So in that particular thing we need to avoid this particular fault tolerance. If for example, if one link is break, right, then there is a no access to this particular switches from this distribution layer, right? And for that we need to provide a multiple links to this particular switches from the access to the distribution, right? And so that also we have multiple link to between this particular distribution to distribution layer switches as well, right, to maintain the to avoid the fault tolerance, right? So this is a access layer example, right? So from the distribution layer you need to you need to send the packet to each of the access layer, right? And from the access layer these lines are nothing but the end user connections, right? From this particular switches we can connect a number of end users, right? And from this particular arrows we will connect the number of core layers switches or networking devices, right? So this is overall example of this particular access layer, right? Then we will move towards our distribution layer. What exactly the distribution layer do, right? So it is nothing but representation of both a separation between access and core layer, obviously, and a connection point between the diverse access sites and the core layer, right? So it is nothing but a middleman in between the core layer and the access layer, right? It will be connected to both of the layers, access layer as well as the core layers, right? Then the distribution layer determines our department or work group access and provide the policy based connectivity. As I earlier told you how the policy can be incorporated in distribution layer networking devices, right? How the configuration can be used, how for example if you wanted to give certain labs a very high bandwidth and a certain lab for the very low bandwidth, because the utilization of that particular labs is accordingly, right? And you can do that at your distribution layer, right? You can use bandwidth management protocols or things at the distribution layer, and you can easily do that things, right? For example, if you want some extra security parameters, extra security services you need to provide to a certain lab, for example lab 301, right? Then that also that also possible by configuring this particular distribution layer switches or networking devices, right? Then third point is the distribution layer represents a routing boundary, right, between the access and core layers, and is where routing and packets manipulation are performed, right? For example, if you wanted a different routing protocol for a different labs, right, or for different LAN infrastructure, right? So that also possible at the distribution layer, right? So so any policy based, any security based, any routing protocol based configuration if you wanted to do, right? So that can be possible in this particular distribution layer switches, right? So if you consider I will give you one example here in a distribution layer example, right? If you see here in this particular diagram, right, so multi-layer switching is used, right, towards the access layer, right? This multi-layer switching is done towards the access layer, and as well as this multi-layer switching is done at this core layer as well, right, in this core layer as well. So distribution layer is performs a two-way route redistribution here, right, to exchange the route in between the these particular RIPs, right, and the this particular EIGRP protocols, right. So these are the nothing but the routing protocols, EIGRP and RIP, right. But EIGRP is at which part of the network, is a core part of the network, right. And the RIP is which part of the infrastructure, it will be on your access layer way, right. So these two routing protocols will be used, one at the side of the core layer and one at the side of the access layer, right. So these are nothing but the multi-layer switching, right. And the route summarization is also configured at the interface towards the this particular core layer, right. If you see here in this particular diagram, the route summarization, the load balancing, all these things at the core layer side, right. And where the routing, filtering, whatever it is there, this is at your the access layer side, right. So and this particular distribution layer is connected with the access as well as this particular core layer, right. So it is nothing but the middleman, right. So middle layer which is nothing but the distribution layer. So whatever the what we can call as and here also if you see, the redundant connectivity will be there, right. For example, this particular switch to all these access layer switches, right. This particular switch distribution layer switch to this particular core layer switches, right. So every networking inter-networking device is having a multiple connections, right. The redundant connectivity, right. Why? Because to avoid the fault tolerance in between these particular network infrastructure, right. So this this is nothing but a distribution layer example if you see, right. Then we will move towards our the core layer functionality, right. What is the core layer and how the core layer will be used, right. So the function for the core layer is to provide fast and efficient data transport, obviously, right. So our aim of the our network infrastructure, building our network infrastructure is what, to gives you a better connectivity, to gives you a fast connectivity, right. So that is nothing but the aim and the functionality of this particular core layer, right. Then the core layer is a high speed backbone, right. That should be designed to switch packet as quickly as possible to optimize the communication transport within the network, right. So this core layer is nothing but the backbone, right. So each every layers network is depending on your the core layer switching, right. Core layer high speed switching, because if it is a break, right, then all the network will be collapse, right. So so the main aim of this particular core layer is to give the high speed switching, to give the to send the packet as possible as quickly as, right, and to optimize the communication transport within the particular network. This is the main goal or main functionalities of this particular core layer, right. So if you see in our college network also, in 318 all the server routers and all that firewalls and all that things are there, which will be used as core layer, right. And after that this if particular one server is goes down, for example the proxy server is goes down, then entire internet connection will be hampered, right. So it will be very so we have multiple proxy servers in our networking server room. So if one down, then we will redirect it to our next proxy server. So it will be helpful to us to maintain connectivity availability to our networking services, right. So this is nothing but your the core layer functionality. So we will see again examples also with respect to this particular core layer switching, right. So in this particular diagram we will see how this layer 2 switching in this particular campus core, for example it is nothing but our campus network, then how the switching can be done in this particular networking infrastructure, right. So again any kind of the network we are dividing it into three parts, access layer, distribution layer and the core layer part, right. So in core layer point one second, yes, in the core layer point, the high speed interconnect connectivity, that is nothing but your the core layer, right? Then the distribution layer, which will be connected to your access layer and the core layer, and the access layer which will be directly connected to the your end users, right? So if you consider in this particular diagram, the access layer is also having this layer 2 switching, the core layer is also having this layer 2 switching, and the distribution is having your the multi-layer switching, right? So whatever the packet is layer 2 switch towards a distribution layer switch, right, distribution switch, then distribution switch is performing your multi-layer switching towards your the core toward your core interface, right? And then the packet is layer 2 switched across your LAN, right, across your the LAN. Then it will be received, the distribution switch performs multi-layer switching towards the access to the our LAN, right? And then lastly the packet is layer to switch across the access layer LAN to the destination host, right? That means how the packet it goes from the core layer to access layer switch. If you consider here in this particular diagram, right, so the layer 2 packet is switched to the distribution layer switch from the core layer, right? Then at the distribution layer switch, the packet will be perform the multi-layer switching to access the over the LAN, right? And this particular access over the LAN, it goes to your access layer of the LAN of the access layer 2 switches again, right? And after that it will be goes to your destination host, right? So it will be nothing but the example of your what we can call as campus core layer 2 switching, right? And in this way also there is one switching we can call it as a multi-layer switching, right? So in that what happen, in that for if you see in this particular diagram, multi-layer switching, right? So here also there is a multi-layer switching with the core layer, right? The layer 2 access layer is as it is, right? In the distribution layer, multi-layer as it is, and at the core layer again there is a multi-layer switching we will perform, right? So what happened in this particular diagram, the packet is layer 2 switch towards again a distribution layer switch, right? Then a distribution switch performs here the multi-layer switching over the LAN over towards the access LAN, right? And then the receiving distribution switch perform multi-layer to access LAN, then the packet of the layer 2 switch across the access layer LAN to the destination host, right? So here just the difference is what, here at the core layer side also there is a multi-layer switching is there, right? But yes, in layer 2 switching, the core layer at the core layer the layer 2 switching is there, right? It in layer 2 only at the distribution level multi-layer switching is there, while multi-layer switching only at access layer 2 switching is there, and else for the distribution and for the core layer the multi-layer switching will be there, right? So this you need to keep in mind while discussing the hierarchical routing, right? So now we will move towards our last concept, that is hierarchical routing in WAN, right? So if you consider in this particular diagram, right, this is nothing but the wide area network. The three kind of the network will be there, right? Each having some of the routers which are interconnected with each others, right? If you see in this particular diagram also, right? So here in each of the network there are some three layers again we have divided into, right? For example, if you consider this last routers are nothing but here the access layer routers, right? From that you are just connecting destinations host, right? Yes, and then the middle one router is nothing but the distribution layer switch, right? Because it having some policy based connectivity to these all these access layers, right? And these are the nothing but the core layer. Why this is your core layer here? Because it connected to from one network to another network of in this wide area network, right? So that's why it is nothing but your the core layer, right? So how the packet will be transferred? So here the layer 3 we can call as switching will be there, right? The packet is layer 3 forward towards the destination router, right? Then destination router forward the packet towards the core interface, right? And then packet forwarded across the WAN core, right? That means core, this particular core to this particular core, right? Then the receiving distribution router to forward the packet towards appropriate access layer router, right? And from the access layer router you will get directly to the your destination host access to the particular LAN network, right? So this way this particular packet transfer can be done in this particular WAN network, right? So how this hierarchical routing can be take place, we have seen in this particular WAN network, right? So keep in mind, in any kind of the network, this particular hierarchical layers, right, what we have discussed today is very much important, right? So what we have covered today is hierarchical network model. We have discussed access layer, distribution layer, core layer, what is the functionality of it, and then what is the examples of it, right? We have discussed. Then lastly we have discussed the hierarchical routing in the wide area network, right? Okay, so in any kind of the network, if you planning to design any kind of the network, right, then you must be think upon three layers, right? What is the access layer, what is the distribution layer, what is the core layer, right? And it is very useful for you to identify the internetworking devices under each of the layers, right? So for example, if you wanted to design any kind of the organization network, right, and if you know these three layers, in these three layers you need to design a network, then you need to categorize an networking devices as well. You need to define your services and policies as well, in by which you need to configure these on your distribution layer, right? And from that core layer to distribution layer, how the cabling can be done, and from distribution layer to access layer, how the locations can be set, right? How the cabling can be done, then how the internet policy based networking can be used, how the bandwidth management can be done in the distribution layer. All these things then you need to think upon, right? So this is nothing but the hierarchical network model that will be useful in for structuring and modularizing any kind of the network infrastructure, right? So this is all about today's lecture. So we will stop today. So there is again one quiz is there, for 3 questions are there for 3 minutes, right? So you need to attempt it. It is mandatory for all. Okay, so ma'am will post the link in a chat box. So we will stop today. Okay, thank you for joining.